Hi, I'm Matthew from Dark Ascent, and today I will take a look at a case where a woman turned a solo winter hike into a live stream. With her stream gaining attention and conditions still looking calm, she pushed deeper into the basin, unaware she was already beneath terrain that would decide everything that followed. What started as a beautiful, snowy morning in the mountains became the last broadcast she ever made. It was January 14th, 2023. Fort Collins was still wrapped in winter darkness, the streets quiet under freezing air, with a thin frost settled across windshields, rooftops, and the edges of parked cars. At that hour, the city felt paused, like even sound had been held back until sunrise. Mary Quincy Medellin was a 28-year-old freelance graphic designer and part-time barista who had slowly built a life around the mountains of Colorado. She ran a small but growing online channel where she documented hikes and climbs, pairing practical outdoor footage with quiet, reflective narration. Mary grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a non-outdoorsy household where her parents worked in healthcare administration, and life followed a steady, uneventful rhythm. She studied graphic design at Ohio State University, graduating in 2016, then spent 3 years working at a marketing firm in Columbus before deciding she wanted to live closer to the mountains. After visiting a college friend in Fort Collins in 2017, she relocated there permanently the following spring, driving west in her 2009 Subaru Outback. Her hiking started out pretty casually, day trips into Rocky Mountain National Park, some short overnight hikes, nothing too serious. But over time it became a big part of her life. By 2017, she was going out alone pretty regularly, and by 2018 she had started live streaming those trips on a small but slowly growing channel known for its calm, quiet vibe, slow views from ridgelines, close shots of snow and pine, and relaxed, conversational talking to the camera. She wasn't some extreme climber or thrill seeker either, which is what makes this case feel even more unsettling when you look back at it. By January 2023, she had around 1,100 followers, with modest engagement and occasional viewer donations. Her most notable achievement was the summer 2018 summit of Handy's Peak, which she often referenced as a confidence-building milestone. However, her winter backcountry experience remained limited to a couple of snowshoe trips on well-marked routes, and she did not carry Avalanche safety equipment, such as a beacon, probe, or shovel, despite having researched them and planning to purchase a full set before doing anything serious, according to a message sent to a friend in early January 2023. Financially, she was in a quieter period of freelance work with reduced client volume in late 2018, and the live stream channel had begun to feel like a potential supplement to her income. She planned a winter trip to the San Juan Mountains, partly for its visual appeal, aware that the region's snow-covered terrain was highly photogenic. She told her roommate she'd be back within a day, packed her usual winter gear and filming setup, and checked the weather. Clear skies, cold air, nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. What she didn't really dig into was the avalanche forecast, which was calling high danger for the region, after a big storm dropped around 38 inches of snow onto a weak, sugary base layer. It specifically warned that steep terrain was unstable and that slabs could release with new loading and daytime warming. This is one of those details that feels small at first, but in hindsight basically frames everything that happens next. She departed early in the morning and drove south from Fort Collins, making a brief stop en route before continuing into the San Juan Mountains. By mid-morning, she had reached the locked gate marking the winter closure of the Alpine Loop. From there, she proceeded on foot, snowshoeing up the unplowed road into the drainage beneath Engineer Pass. The terrain transitioned into a wide alpine bowl flanked by steep slopes, with no other vehicles or visitors present. She parked at the gate around mid-morning and began her approach into the back country shortly after. She remained in her car briefly after parking, based on a voice memo later recovered from her phone that was time-stamped shortly after her estimated arrival. In the recording, she described the surroundings as absolutely gorgeous, noting the presence of fresh snow and the absence of other vehicles at the trailhead. Her tone was calm and quiet, and she indicated she would begin her hike shortly. The lack of other visitors, while consistent with the region's high avalanche danger rating following recent snowfall, appeared to register only as a positive aspect of solitude rather than a warning sign. She then prepared her gear and began traveling up the snow-covered road on snowshoes. The route followed a wide drainage and was initially gradual, requiring steady effort due to deep, unconsolidated snow and high elevation conditions. The environment was visually striking, with steep mountain walls rising on either side and wind-deposited snow covering the upper terrain. In the still morning air, sound was limited to movement through snow and breathing, creating a quiet, isolated travel environment. She started her live stream roughly midway through this approach, setting up a phone on a small tripod after gaining elevation along the road. The broadcast opened with a slow panoramic view of the surrounding peaks before framing her directly as she introduced the location. She appeared physically comfortable despite the cold, dressed in layered winter gear with visible signs of exertion from the climb. The live stream itself was intermittent from the start, cutting in and out as she moved through weaker coverage pockets along the drainage. When the signal held, the viewer count briefly showed around 40 to 60 viewers, but it would reset or fluctuate each time the connection dropped and reconnected over the course of the first hour. Chat messages appeared in uneven bursts during those short, stable windows, mostly general questions about location, weather, and the surrounding scenery. Mary responded during the periods when the stream was live, speaking while moving and occasionally adjusting her phone setup between sections of the route. She held her phone in one hand and a trekking pole in the other, with a chest-mounted camera capturing a wider field of view. Her commentary remained steady and observational, focusing on terrain details such as wind-shaped snow patterns and changing light conditions across the slopes during the moments when the stream was actively transmitting. During the stream, a few viewers even brought up avalanche risk, pointing to the recent snowfall and how dangerous the area was known to be. She briefly read one of the comments out loud, kind of laughed it off, and said she'd just stay on lower ground and avoid anything technical. Her response indicated awareness of general risk, but also reflected a limited distinction between what constitutes safe travel and what constitutes avalanche terrain in a backcountry context. And that response makes sense in the moment, but it also shows how easy it is to underestimate what safe really means out there. She continued along the approach as the road gradually gained elevation and the surrounding terrain became more confined. The drainage narrowed and steepened, with the surrounding peaks fully illuminated by morning sunlight. Temperatures remained well below freezing, with wind making conditions feel colder than the recorded air temperature at lower elevations. Around mid-morning, she entered a broad, bowl-shaped basin below Engineer Pass, where the defined road corridor opened into an expansive, open snowfield bordered by steep slopes rising on both sides. The basin floor was flat and uniform under deep snow, with no visible ground features, creating a wide, open area beneath significantly steeper terrain above. The slopes above the bowl were the defining terrain feature. On the south-facing aspect, now exposed to direct sunlight, slope angles ranged roughly between 35 and 42 degrees. This range is widely recognized in avalanche science as the most critical for slab avalanche formation, where gravitational stress is sufficient to load the snowpack, but friction may still temporarily hold it in place. Slopes below about 30 degrees are generally less likely to produce slab avalanches, while slopes above 45 degrees tend to shed snow more continuously, preventing large slab formation. The 35 to 42 degree range is where cohesive slabs are most likely to build and then fail as a single unit. The upper slopes showed multiple indicators of loading, including smooth, uninterrupted snow surfaces, convex terrain features near the ridgeline, and small cornice formations along the crest. These are usually signs of wind-blown snow piling up in unstable layers, but you wouldn't really know that unless you've had avalanche training. To most people looking at it, it just looks like a clean, untouched slope. Just snow, nothing obviously wrong, and that's what makes avalanche terrain so deceptive. Mary paused near the edge of the bowl and filmed a slow panoramic sweep of the surrounding terrain, describing the scene to her audience. Viewer count at that point was under 100, with active chat engagement asking about elevation and landmarks. She estimated her position at roughly 11,000 feet, which was broadly accurate, and noted a nearby rocky outcropping across the bowl that she intended to use as her next filming point. The route to it crossed the open bowl floor and passed through a runout zone beneath the steep upper slopes, a flat-appearing area where avalanche debris would naturally accumulate if a release occurred above. She began moving across the bowl at approximately mid-morning. Before she fully committed to the crossing, the terrain subtly changed in character. The wide basin that appeared flat from a distance began to reveal inconsistencies in snow depth, areas where her snowshoes sank noticeably deeper, followed by sections that felt slightly firmer underfoot. These variations were not visible from above and only became apparent once she was fully inside the bowl. From a terrain perspective, she had now left the defined travel corridor of the road. There was no longer a single safe line of movement, only uniform exposure beneath steep, surrounding surrounding slopes. The sense of direction was still clear, but the protective structure of the route had effectively disappeared. Her breathing became more pronounced on the live stream audio, and her attention shifted away from speaking as she focused on maintaining stable footing. Viewer comments continued to scroll, including one noting the steep slope angle above her, but she did not respond and may not have seen it. The warning did not register as a distinct decision point. In her mental model of the terrain, the distinction between steep slope and dangerous slope was not clearly defined. The bowl itself appeared flat, and the steep terrain remained visually separated above her position, reinforcing the perception that she was not directly exposed to it. This created a subtle but critical mismatch between mapped risk, as understood by experienced backcountry users, and perceived risk as interpreted through visual cues at ground level. She reached a rocky outcropping on the far side of the bowl a few minutes later. The outcropping provided a small flat area where she stopped, set her phone to capture a wide view of the basin, and took a brief break. She drank coffee from a thermos and spoke to the stream about the approach, the conditions, and her general plans for the day, including a possible stop in a nearby town later that evening. The broadcast remained calm and conversational, and viewer engagement held steady at around 130 viewers, with several commenting on the quiet, steady tone of the stream. Just a quiet moment on the rock, taking a break, coffee in hand, talking through the rest of the day while the stream keeps running. Over the next several minutes, she stayed seated on the rock, talking through upcoming projects and saying she wanted to make more winter-focused content. Everything around her still looked calm and unchanged. No movement in the snow above the bowl, nothing that would stand out as a warning from where she was sitting. She was roughly 300 feet from the base of the steepest slope, unaware that conditions above her were already slowly starting to shift. In the minutes leading up to the audible collapse, small indicators of internal snowpack stress would have been present but non-obvious. Her snowshoes occasionally sank deeper than expected in isolated patches, followed by sudden resistance changes beneath the surface. These were signs of uneven load distribution within the snowpack, but they produced no visible surface cracking or obvious instability. From her perspective, these variations would have been consistent with normal post-storm snow conditions, soft, deep, and physically demanding, but not necessarily dangerous. At around mid-morning, the live stream audio captured a low, muffled collapse within the snowpack. In Avalanche science, this is associated with the sudden failure of a weak layer beneath a cohesive slab caused by rapid structural collapse and air displacement within the snowpack. It is widely recognized as a critical warning sign of instability, often indicating that the snowpack has reached a point where fracture propagation becomes significantly more likely. Mary noticed it immediately. She stopped mid-sentence and asked her viewers if they had heard the sound, her tone curious rather than alarmed. The camera showed her turning upslope, scanning a slope that remained visually unchanged, still bright and undisturbed. After a brief pause, she continued speaking, interpreting the moment as unusual but not immediately dangerous, and resumed her stream. If you've ever been in deep snow country, that sound alone would usually make people stop everything. But without context, it's easy to rationalize it. Her interpretation of the event was shaped by the absence of visible change on the slope above her. No snow movement followed the sound, no cracking lines appeared, and the terrain remained visually static. This reinforced the assumption that the sound was an isolated settlement event rather than a precursor to slope failure. In avalanche terrain, this is a common misinterpretation pattern. Auditory warning signs without immediate visual confirmation are often discounted by individuals without formal avalanche training. The conditions appeared calm. She talked about the light shifting across the basin and noted a slight increase in temperature as the sun rose higher. That warming was consistent with normal diurnal change, but on a south-facing, wind-loaded slope, it also contributed to instability by adding energy to an already weakened slab structure beneath the surface. Avalanche forecasts for the region had identified solar warming as a known destabilizing factor during daylight hours under high danger conditions. At this stage, the slope above the bowl was undergoing internal stress redistribution. The weak, faceted layer beneath the storm snow was no longer uniformly supporting the overlying slab. Load transfer across the slope had become uneven, meaning certain sections were now bearing significantly more stress than others. None of this could be seen from where she was. On the surface, everything still looked solid and unchanged, but inside the slope, things were getting close to a breaking point where a failure could spread quickly across multiple points at the same time without any obvious warning from below. Shortly after, she began preparing to leave the area, repacking her gear while continuing to speak to her audience about heading back and capturing a few final shots on the return route. Her attention was split between the stream and her equipment, with her upper body oriented downslope while the terrain above remained in her peripheral awareness. Her final positioning placed her with her body oriented slightly away from the primary slope above, reducing her ability to visually track any initial movement at the crown line. At the same time, the slab above had already transitioned from internal deformation to fracture initiation along a continuous weak layer interface. The slope had already started to fail before anything could be seen on the surface. On the live stream, everything still looked normal, like nothing had changed, right up until the moment the situation fully gave way a few seconds later. The avalanche released on the south-facing slope above the bowl at an elevation of approximately 12,400 feet. The fracture, the line along which the slab separated from the slope, ran approximately 180 feet across the upper face and was later measured at 2.5 feet deep at the crown. The slab that was released was composed of the dense new snow from the January 9th to 12th storm cycle, sitting on the weak, faceted base layer that had developed during December. When the slab separated, it did so along the entire fracture line nearly simultaneously, a characteristic of storm slab avalanches, which tend to release as a single cohesive unit rather than progressively. The slab began moving down the 38-degree slope immediately. On terrain of this angle, with snow of this density, the acceleration is rapid. The leading edge of the debris reached an estimated 60 to 75 miles per hour within the first 400 feet of travel. As the slab broke apart and entrained additional snow from the slope below the fracture line, it generated a powder cloud, a suspension of fine snow particles and air that preceded the denser debris flow. On the live stream, the first visible sign wasn't the ground moving, it was this cloud just appearing at the top of the frame and dropping straight into everything below it. The total volume of snow involved in the event was later estimated at approximately 3,200 tons. The live stream captured what happened next from the stationary phone propped on the rock. Viewers watching in real time saw the powder cloud appear at the top of the frame, a white mass descending from the upper slope, moving faster than the eye expected. The stream audio captured the sound of the avalanche, a deep, sustained roaring that built rapidly in volume, the kind of sound that has no good analog in ordinary experience. Mary is visible in the lower portion of the frame. She is bent over her snowshoe binding. Then she is upright. She turns toward the slope. She takes 2 steps. Everything in the frame just shifts in a way you can almost feel, even through the screen, like the whole scene suddenly stops being still. The debris reached her position in approximately 11 seconds from the moment the powder cloud entered the frame. The stream went dark at 10:53:41 a.m. based on server timestamp data, later reviewed by investigators. The phone was buried or displaced by the debris flow. Even after the image cut out, the stream didn't immediately stop on the back end. It kept transmitting a black frame for several minutes before the connection finally dropped, likely because the phone's antenna or battery had been damaged or fully buried in snow. The avalanche debris field itself covered an area of approximately 420 feet long and 190 feet wide across the floor of the bowl. In the central zone, where the flow was deepest and most forceful, the deposit was later measured at between 7 and 11 feet. Mary was carried an estimated 180 feet from her last standing position before coming to rest beneath roughly 9 feet of compacted avalanche debris. Avalanche debris doesn't stay loose for long. As it slows and settles, it compacts quickly under its own weight, locking into a dense, heavy mass within minutes. Once that happens, movement becomes almost impossible. In burials deeper than roughly 18 inches, self-rescue is essentially no longer realistic. At around 9 feet deep in debris of this density, a person is fully immobilized, with no ability to dig or push through the surrounding snow. From above, what's left is just a wide, uneven field, broken snow blocks, and hard-packed debris, the kind of surface that looks solid again almost immediately, even though what's underneath is completely sealed off. The weight of the snow above makes chest expansion physically impossible once a person is fully buried in dense avalanche debris. Any air pocket that forms around the face is typically small and unstable, and in most cases it begins to shrink almost immediately as the surrounding snow settles and compacts. In these conditions, survival depends entirely on rapid external rescue, ideally with an avalanche transceiver, probe, and shovel being used immediately. Avalanche medicine research places the highest survival probability within roughly the first 15 minutes after burial, after which the likelihood of survival declines steeply as oxygen depletion and hypothermia progress. In this case, there was no immediate rescue presence in the area. No avalanche beacon signal was detected nearby, and no active search infrastructure existed within miles of the location. The nearest occupied structure was approximately 11 miles away in the town of Ure, separated from the site by closed winter terrain and steep mountainous ground. Within minutes, the landscape returned to stillness. The powder cloud that had filled the basin gradually thinned and dispersed, leaving the sky above unchanged and clear. The slope that had released the avalanche now showed a raw crown line high on the south-facing face, exposing older, denser layers of snow at approximately 12,400 feet. Below it, the debris field had settled into a dense, uneven mass of broken snow blocks and compacted fragments, filling the floor of the bowl where, only moments earlier, there had been an uninterrupted field of fresh powder. It wasn't until later that day that her roommate Jessie realized something was wrong. After the incident, bits and pieces of the stream that had buffered or briefly uploaded during short moments of signal started showing up online, mostly reposted by people who had caught it live before it cut out. What they were able to piece together later came from broken clips, short fragments, and cached footage saved on the phone and platform, instead of one full, continuous recording. Jessie tried calling her right away, but every call went unanswered and straight to voicemail. You can almost imagine how confusing those first few hours must have been. Nothing fully makes sense yet, just pieces coming in slowly. As the hours passed with no response, she continued trying at intervals, growing increasingly concerned. By evening, with still no sign of contact or return, she reported Mary missing to local authorities. Given the high avalanche danger and the remote terrain involved, authorities determined that a night search would be unsafe, as it would place rescue personnel in the same unstable conditions that had produced the initial slide. A coordinated search operation was launched at first light the following morning, using both aerial reconnaissance and ground teams. The debris field was located in a high alpine drainage near a mountain pass, and a search dog later identified her burial site. Her body was recovered from nearly 9 feet of compacted snow, with her phone found nearby, with portions of the live stream later recovered through platform records and device data during the investigation. The medical examination concluded that the cause of death was asphyxiation due to snow burial, with no significant blunt force trauma prior to burial. A regional avalanche safety authority later classified the incident as a natural storm slab and avalanche, triggered by heavy new snowfall over an unstable weak layer under high danger conditions, consistent with prior forecasts for the area. No equipment failure, third-party involvement, or foul play was identified. Mary Meadow, 28, had been in the mountains for recreation and live streaming, and her final broadcast remained online briefly before being removed as the investigation concluded.